Thank you very much, Mathieu. Victor, I don't know if you want to comment on some of the issues. Yes, first.
Yes,
Thank you.
Mostly about the last point. It is true that I didn't say anything about the consequences of the Ukrainian crisis, mostly because it's still ongoing. And we are not 100% certain that it will go down in the way that we're thinking. In other words, it will cause a major realignment of supply chains and everything else. So it's better to wait and see. But I agree that that will be the case. It seems to be what will happen. There is the, uh, the what the economists refer to as the globalization of markets actually suggests that what is going on will probably radically alter further the already reversal of the trend toward great reliance on long lines of transportation and communication. Uh, that's almost like the mainstream point of view right now. Uh, but it comes back to this question of whether we accept the economic or neoliberal definition of globalization, which I don't think we should. So yes, that's a debate, but it's mostly a debate about globalization as a first order concept. I am now with regard to the other ones. Yes, all of these are quite interesting, fascinating developments, especially with regard to South to South cooperation, alternative modernities, Latour, and of course the importance for taking into consideration the non-human as a constitutive part of the world. And that goes back to a question that I didn't touch at all, the question of the formation of the self and the formation of the self in relation to others, including the external, including the environmental factors. And that's not really new because even Talcott Parsons included the external environment within his framework of social action. So this has always been taken into consideration. The relevance of this has obviously increased. We're currently dealing with an environmental crisis. But yes, I did not talk about the formation of the self. That is very much true. There is the first point was the point about the technological power, and I think that yes, it's true that the currently the power relationships and the sort of like the process of capitalism exploitation takes place both within advanced countries and disadvantaged countries, and it really doesn't make much sense to oversimplify the picture. It's there is an issue with reporting because some things happen and they capture the news headlines only if they happen within specific contexts, and they are ignored if they are in places that we don't want to talk about. And unfortunately, Ukraine offers a great example. What if Ukraine was in Africa? So that's very much true. Yeah, that's let's get some other responses as well.
I guess you want to say something?
Yes, thank you very much, Professor. Καλή σας μέρα. I am Greek, as you know. I'm French, and I was always uncomfortable with global studies because something that you mentioned also, it's limited in its scope and the range of topics that are touched upon. I was wondering how much of all this discussion, which you know very much and that you have lived as an actor of the field, let's say, how much has been influenced not so much by economists and business people, which are the majority of people who talk about the global and globalization, but how much has been touched upon by other fields of knowledge coming, like environmental sciences, health. What about the global health, for example? How much did it touch upon the global studies in the social sciences? What is your view upon this?
Not much, unfortunately. That's very true. There is an effort mostly by the more of the left, I would say, that they are willing to examine power inequalities and class inequalities within the context of health and provision of health. But in the academic debate, the one side of the debate, the debate that takes place in the press, in the magazines, in The Economist, Wall Street, that sort of thing. That's mostly the economists that play the dominant role. In the debate that takes place within more esoteric academic space, sort of like the social sciences, that's where it's mostly sociologists and anthropologists and political scientists. And it's oddly, whereas sociologists and anthropologists have a lot to say about health, both in advanced societies and in developing societies. There isn't that much of an emphasis on that. And I believe that that reflects this weird split in the field. One of the biggest areas of specialization in sociology is medical sociology, or sociology of health. I think in the American Sociological Association, medical sociology is one of the biggest sections, if not the biggest. But it's not on good terms, it does not really integrate very well with the rest of it. In other words, it uses general ideas and concepts for the field, but we don't have a feedback loop so that it can play a more prominent role. It's just not sufficiently visible. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that some of the people who work in the field are employed not in academia, but elsewhere, in hospitals or firms or other institutions. And so, they are not as well connected.
Thank you very much.
Jean-Baptiste Meyer, peut-être, avant Vincenzo.
Oui, bonjour. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Mathieu, for your comments and very interesting insights. When I was a master's student at Boston University in the early 1980s, my professors were already mentioning global networks, global interdependence, and globalization as such was not defined, but there was the concern about the global and global issues. and that was even before the fall of the Iron Curtain or the WTO, and even before Rio 1992, the environmental issue upsurge. And I think it was because the international relations studies as a field could not manage with the issue of global entities, which were appearing at the moment. And it's just to pick up on what you said for these chronology of the emergency of the concept as such. The second point is about the global south and global north terms. They appeared much after the globalization term, and precisely at the moment that maybe the political integration of the globalization was like put into challenge. For me, the global south, global north terms appeared from the 2000 onwards and not before, which is like a sign that there is still this concern about the global disequilibrium and asymmetries, which were more, they were much more present at the time than they used to be before. It's like these asymmetries happen to become one of the main concepts of globalization, probably. And third, for what Mathieu mentioned about different sociologies and including the non-humans, it seems to me that precisely there is a discussion about the national methodology, the methodological nationalism with the transnational studies field, which is interesting at this on this point, with the notions of other references than the national ones to understand what happens with global issues. I don't know if you can answer to these questions. There were more comments, additional comments to the discussion we had before.
Yes, obviously I could not, for the purposes of presentation, one has to slightly oversimplify to make the picture sharper. The concern with the growth of international organizations was one of the major reasons for the emergence of the entire problematic. And it was mostly post-World War II phenomenon. And yes, it's true that the international relations people were the ones that caught on to it first. We do have an entire historical trajectory that goes actually back to the 60s, when for the first time people started having a debate of whether corporations should be seen as multinationals or transnationals. That was in the 60s. And then in the 70s, we did the development of the transnational organizations, that there were organizations, in other words, that were not merely international, but transnational, that they were trying to do something different. Organizations like Amnesty International or Greenpeace, that their goal was not merely to internationalize. And the growth, the numerical growth of these organizations was one of the major research areas, where John Mayer and his researchers and his students started working on. They started working with similarity in educational systems, and then they moved on with international organizations. And to this day, it is still one of the major research sites, because the study of international organizations reveals specific patterns that are observed worldwide. Yes, all of that was part of prehistory. The other track of the history has to do with the fact that Talcott Parsons, he postulated a certain degree of universalizing specific components. And so it created a framework whereby specific features of societies would win out in the last instance. And therefore, some features were destined to become global in shape. That is also an intellectual influence from a different take, from a different trajectory. All of these are factors that did play a very important role in the prehistory or early history. But of course, it was after the collapse of communism that globalization became a buzzword. It became fashionable. But of course, the version of globalization that became fashionable was the economist version. And that is what most of the world still operates. It operates within that frame of reference. It does not operate within frame of reference that the social scientists are using. Global studies has a lot of issues, including, of course, the fact that it cannot claim a monopoly and that it has some specific disciplinary baggage that comes with it. It has been, of course, quite successful. The notion of the global south came about as a reaction to the economic neoliberal regimes coming out and becoming tremendously popular at the aftermath of the fall of communism. But it was also put together as a program aimed to obtain academic legitimacy. In the process, the coherence of the South is very much debated. Not only as a critique from the outside, but also as a contentious issue from within. So if you read the scholars in that literature who call themselves, who say that we are from the South, they do not necessarily agree, not even on the labels. So people in Brazil, for example, Latin America, they call their perspective decolonial, not post-colonial. They say post-colonials are the people who are in the North who are criticizing the North. And we do not have the same agenda and we do not have the same interests. That is well known, been documented. But that also means that there are multiple points of view from multiple areas around the world. Now, people don't talk about this, but one of these perspectives is the Russian Eurasian perspective, which is the ideology, worldview, how we want to call it, that the current Russian government and a large portion of the elite share. And it is very much related to the fact that they don't care about the sanctions. The sanctions actually play into their heads. These people think that they need to go away from the West, and the West kicking them out gives them exactly what they want. So I'm saying because sometimes, you have a debate, but, you don't put them in, and, they're kind of like important right now. So what we have is different articulations of local perspectives. And arguably, I think that some of the Russian theorists are very good in acknowledging the fact that it is precisely that. And that it is possible to have a plural universe of different forms of local worldviews expressed. If these are expressed with respect and recognition of each other's difference. We are very far from that kind of world. We are living in a world where the mainstream perspectives are completely dominating public opinion, and in many ways also dominate the academic world.
Thank you very much, Victor. And Vincenzo, maybe for some final remarks, because we have to close soon.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Professor Singh also would like to intervene.
Professor Singh.
Yes.
I
Yes,
say
please.
hello.
Please.
Please.
Thank you, and I am very grateful to you to organize such an event. I get this information through Facebook from Vincenzo, who is my Facebook friend, and we never met, but virtually we are interacting on a everyday basis. I think that Professor Rodomatov has presented a very comprehensive view of the conceptual and methodological issues of globalization. And I think that the globalization still is not, we don't have very comprehensive picture of the globalization at conceptual and methodological level. And there are different, and perhaps sometimes I feel that when we look from Western perspective, globalization, the most of the discussions are either from neo-Marxist perspectives in which they highlight on the crisis of capitalism. And particularly Wallerstein and his followers and many others. On the other hand, I see the scholars who have debated on the issue of the project of modernity. Anthony Giddens, Manuel Castells, and also Ulrich Beck, Zygmunt Bauman, he talk of liquid modernity. And I think that still the modernity is the key phenomenon, and which is still in debate whether we are talking of globalization or postmodernism, and the issues like whether the modernity is over. And when I read Eisenstein, he talks about multiple modernity. We talk about reflexive modernity. And there are many, conceptual terms which are directly or indirectly related to the process of globalization. So we are trying to capture the reality which is emerging in last 4 or 5 decades in all parts of the world. To me, what is more important, if we see it from modernity perspective, I think the most important breakthrough of the modern era was the steam technology. And industrialization has transformed the European society for the first time from feudal to a modern society. So from that perspective, we see that in the last part of the 20th century, it is the communication technologies which has given a very large breakthrough, not only to the Western society, but to the whole world, to the whole world. And you see that now this force, that is virtual connectivity, which is very important, and we are participating in this debate. So I think this is the core phenomenon which is in process of globalization. So I think that our conceptual battery, which we can use for the analysis of the globalization, should focus on this. And from a methodological point of view, if we see that we have certain conceptual tools like social network, which was developed in 1954 by John Barnes, the Australian professor. And he tried to develop a conceptual framework as an analytical tool, social network as an analytical tool, to study certain communities which are more dynamic than the community like villages. And he used this analytical tool for the understanding of the relations which go beyond the boundary that is trans-village relations. And today we have transnational interactions in globalization. And I think that there is a need to reuse or to read those concepts which were initially given by the John Barnes and J. Clyde Mitchell, another British sociologist. He further developed network analysis. So I think from methodological point of view, network analysis may be one important tool for the study of the globalization. Then there are certain problems which are emerging in last few decades, and particularly at ideological level, there was a discussion, I think, that is Daniel Bell's The End of Ideology, which started and post-industrial, coming of post-industrial society. And now almost all in the debate of globalization, it was accepted that there is end of ideology. And particularly after the downfall of the USSR, it was considered that now there is only one ideology, and this is a failed modernity, what Eisenstein had said about the USSR, that is a failed modernity. I think that again, ideological clash is coming out. In last few decades, we have seen some very important phenomenon which should draw the attention of the sociologist. One is the Afghanistan war. What happened in Afghanistan last year? It was okay, everything was happening in the boundary of the Afghanistan, but virtually the whole world was connected with that. And it influenced the ideas, the life, and many other aspects of social life of the people. So today we are in media, there is a debate, there may be third world war. I think it is already started. It is not in that form which happened in the Second World War. The face-to-face war is taking place in Ukraine, but the whole world is involved virtually in that. In India also, our TV channels 24 hours covering that war, and they have sent their correspondents in the war zone, and they are reporting from there. So I think it is not virtually the whole world is involved in this war. So I think this is a very qualitative difference in social phenomena in which virtually things are taking place. So I think from sociological point of view, we should pay our attention on this dimension of the globalization, which is affecting our everyday life, our ideas, our opinions. And even a common man who has may not be very educated, I'm talking about India, he also know what is happening in Ukraine. How Russia, they know Putin, Zelensky, they have common name for common man. They are discussing all these things. So I think it is a very, change in the whole world. Not only, it is not just confined to some societies, but I think the public opinion, and that is very important. The ideas are very important in any society. So it is affecting the society throughout the world. So globalization has to be seen from this perspective. And I think it is not just the question of modernity, but it is beyond that. And there are many aspects which have to be conceptualized. So I congratulate the speaker that you have presented a comprehensive view that how different vocabularies, transnationalism, cosmopolitanism, and translocality, and we also have globalization, and so many conceptual tools we are having. But what is most important is how to apply these tools empirically, which is the basic thing in the study of sociology. So these are my views on this presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Singh. Thank you. Vincenzo, would you like to
Yeah,
conclude? Yes.
only if Victor would reply. Otherwise, I don't conclude. It's impossible.
No,
It's just to thank Victor and Mathieu for the presentation, the quality of discussion, and also the attendees. I did appreciate the presentation, and I'm always impressed by the command of the literature that you show when you write your papers, book, during the talk. I just would like to maybe to get back to the question of the supposed end of globalization. I don't mention the role played by China, that it's pushing forward a very strong globalization and considering itself as the new driver of globalization, much more than the US, actually. And maybe just as we speak about stages and cycles of expansion and contraction when we talk about capitalism, we should talk about cycles when we talk about globalization, because it's not a linear process. It's not an evolution. And yes, of course, I completely agree with you on many points. You know that. And if I think, I consider that in public discourse, in our disciplines, globalization is very new. Conversely, when we see globalization as a process, is very old, is very ancient, much ancient, maybe than modernity. And this is why I think that today, I'm not provocative at all, but I do think that today we should not talk about the end of globalization. Maybe the beginning of globalization. Why? Because if globalization is a major connection, it's an inclusion, and all parts of the world, this is realizing today, now. And Mathieu lingers on the question of infrastructure. Yes, of course. The world is today, if we see the capitalist infrastructure, and especially the platform capitalism. Look at Netflix and Spotify, Amazon. It's maybe is the first time in our history that the world is so connected. And maybe what we should see is that to some extent, we are witnessing the decentering of globalization, to quote Peggy Levitt, or to quote Koichi Iwabuchi, a Japanese scholar, and recentering of globalization. Maybe we should insist on or take again into account the dynamic, not only the dynamic between North and South and East and West. Look at what is we are witnessing today with the war between West and again the East. But it's not only the question between North and South, but even the question of the center, the ancient centers, ancient hegemonic center, and the new players. And new players such as, of course, China, Japan, Brazil, to some extent, if you see the question of the cultural globalization, and you know how that is important for you and for me, if we see the question of the cultural globalization, maybe today, what is important is to see that the new players are emerging, and they want the globalization because they attract. They are becoming much more important than in the past because globalization is giving them a great opportunity to be, to propose an alternative. I think about, of course, the Asianization of pop culture, Japan, South Korea, and so on. So maybe we should include in our consideration the fact that, of course, in the past, globalization was, when we talk about globalization, we thought about West, but today it's finished. If we consider the hegemony, cultural hegemony, the US are not not the only great nation in the cultural production, not at all. Especially when we consider consumption, cultural consumption among young people.
Well, thank you very much, Vincenzo. Thank you again, Victor. And thank you,
all very,
Mathieu,
very
for
much.
discussing. It was a very, very thick seminar today with lots of discussion and issues. Thank you, everybody, for being there. And
Thank you, Vincenzo. Thank you, Mathieu.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
very much. Thank you again.
And
Okay.
you can, if you want to know the group's events, do not look at the chat, and you will be able to receive the newsletter. Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Next
you.
time.
Efkaristopoli.